An IJ type might put up walls to make sure that the person they're in a relationship with can't really do a lot of damage. You don't want to get too close. You don't want to let your guard down. It's a fantasy to believe we are ever truly going to be invulnerable to all things that could potentially disrupt our lives. The key is not to hide ourselves away. The key is to be willing to have the courage to step out and to be willing to sit with that uncertainty.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So we're in the middle of a series right now talking about the firm model of personality. This is it's an acronym. It's a little mental model that we came up with and wrote in our book when we wrote our book back in 2018. I think it's chapter 22. I forget the page number. But we wrote about the firm model. We've done podcasts about this, and we're now on episode 3 of a 5-part series. Episode 1, we overviewed the entire thing and talked about what FIRM stands for: freedom, invulnerability, rightness, and management. These are ways that people can sometimes get fixated in their personalities, and we talked about the personality types that cluster around these strategies or fixations sometimes in folks. So I recommend going back and listening to that first episode because it's going to lay down the tracks of this, of what we're going to talk about today. Last episode, we tackled the first letter in the acronym, freedom. And this is what all EPs use. So ENTPs, ENFPs, ESTPs, and ESFPs will have that freedom fixation. I would recommend, if you are one of those types or have somebody like that in your life, go back and listen to that. We're talking about this in the framework of relationships. I'm going really fast just to cover all this ground to get to what we want to talk about today. This week, we're going to take that second letter, I, and it stands for invulnerability. And these personality types that cluster around invulnerability are all the IxxJ types. So INTJ, INFJ, ISTJ, and ISFJ have a tendency, a proclivity to being fixated on being invulnerable, not being vulnerable in the world, having this invulnerability shield up. Quick, and I know we want to jump right into that. If you're like, what are you talking about, Joel? Can I get a little more information? I'm a brand new listener. Maybe I haven't listened to you guys in a while. You want to get started with a great mental model that we're going to be using today, head over to personalityhacker.com/car model. It's going to be a great resource. We use a mental model to understand how the cognitive functions of personality show up, not just that 4-letter code, but the way we learn information, make decisions. The car model will explain how we approach it here at PH. Okay. I think I did everything I need to do.
Did you lay all the groundwork?
I probably forgot something in that quick 3-minute summary.
Has all the pre been ambled?
I don't know. I hope so. I'm sure we'll have to do it more. I knocked it out of the way. What did I forget, Antonia? Anything on the laying down of the tracks of the things we need to cover today?
No, I think you did a pretty good job. So the going over freedom, if freedom is about sovereignty, autonomy, and to be able to explore without constraint, and you're ultimately sort of seeking, I don't think we said it in the episode, but you're basically trying to feel the exhilaration of possibilities.
Yeah, emergence.
Right? Yeah, things that emerge, things that are like, what's around the next corner? I just want to know that piece of information. And so it's a desire to not be limited in any way. Invulnerability is kind of almost the opposite of that.
Yes.
And it's more about a sense of safety and security. It's about not being vulnerable to the things that could harm you, whether those are physical or, emotional or psychological. It's really wanting to be protected and feel a sense that everything's going to be okay. So the reason why we create these fixations, as we mentioned in the last couple episodes, is because we're trying to protect or provide the best environment or situation for our dominant or driver cognitive function. In the case of IJ types, for INJs, it'll be introverted intuition or perspectives. For ISJs, it's going to be introverted sensing or what we call memory. And as opposed to the EP types, theirs was an extroverted perceiving function, which is about exploring the world around us or exploring the world of ideas. For IJ types, it's a perceiving function that's introverted, right? Introverted sensing or introverted intuition. And that means capturing and then post-processing. The introverted part means processing. And so if you're bringing information in to be able to understand it in post, well, then that means that whatever gets brought in is kind of trapped inside of there until you figure it out. So there is a desire for things to not disrupt one's calm, to not scoop up and bring in distressing information, to not have to be stuck in this processing of something that does not make you feel okay.
Yeah.
And a desire to make sure that everything's going to be all right, both directions of the timeline. If you think about things that were not all right in the past, well, then that's going to bring up the feeling of grief. If you think of things that are not going to be okay into the future, this brings up a sensation of anxiety. So these two functions are very orientated towards a long timeline. Introverted sensing memory, the past, introverted intuition perspectives into the future.
Yeah.
And so you could see why people who have both those functions as a dominant or driver, something that they are compelled to do all the time, would want to make sure that that is like a clean bandwidth. They don't want it too much stuff in the past that they're regretting, making them feel bad. And they don't want too much stuff in the future that they feel anxiety around. And so there's a desire to keep everything all, like safe, everything in a nice balance, to make sure that everything's going to be okay, and that they're not just stuck processing all this, all these terrible things.
Yeah. So I think that's actually very true. The content itself can be troubling. If something gets brought in that you have to process, that gets stuck in there. So in one way, we could look at this as content. I think the other thing that if you're an IJ type, you're going to resonate with this, the dominant function you have of either memory or perspectives, the process itself can be disrupted by new things coming in. So if you are ruminating on the past, like just the act of doing the function itself, you need quiet and stillness, and you need to be able to just go in and remember what you need to remember without any disruption. You need peace and quiet for that. Same thing with looking to the future with your perspectives process for INJs. That process cannot be disrupted or it's distressing. So it's not just the content that can be brought in. These are almost like fragile processes in themselves. Like they have a lot of capacity, but to operate well, they're like finely tuned instruments that need quiet and peace to do their best work. And so I think some of this invulnerability too is to prevent just pure disruption for its own sake. It's not even the content that could come through disruption, but the disruption itself is also an issue, right? Because it disrupts how you process.
Yep.
So I think both of those things are running. It's content and also functionality is what's being protected there.
Yep.
And it makes sense. And we talked about this in the last episode for EPs. And here in IJs, you want to bring things onto your terms. You want to bring them into your sandbox. You want them in the field of play that you understand. So it makes sense for us to pursue a life and set up our life on the terms that would best serve us and let us do our best work and be our best selves, right? I mean, it makes sense why this would be a desire of an IJ.
Yeah, I think that is totally, I think that is totally accurate and very, very relevant to the conversation.
Yeah.
And if it takes a long time to figure out a thing, right?
Yeah.
You're ruminating on it and disruptions throw you out, then you could see why there would be a lot of like you wouldn't want things to be thrown at you last minute.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to have to make fast decisions. You wouldn't want to have to figure something out really quickly. You would want to be able to take your time. You want to be able to plan for it. You want to be able to sort of simulate what that's going to look like in your mind, or review all the times you've seen this before. For sure, you're not going to want to have to be that adaptable or turn on a dime.
Yeah, and so something that it makes sense why we need it and why you would want it as an IJ. Just like I used, again, this example in the last episode, sugar. Our brains need some amount of sugar in our diet. But in our modern Western world, we are able to produce so much synthetic sugars, and it's in all of our food supply, that no longer is it a benefit to humans, it's actually become a liability. So what was once a seasoning or just a small amount of our diet that helped us, our brain function better, maybe the fruit we would eat or something, now it's everywhere and it's becoming a problem. It's too much. We're actually fixated on sugar, and we're have an addiction to it in a way in our culture.
Yep.
And so in a similar way, something that could be seemingly positive in your life, like bringing things under your terms as an IJ to make sure those processes can operate, it can go off the rails and you can become fixated too much on that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that and what that looks like.
So I was going to say, in the same way that we discussed how too much freedom, being one-sided with a desire for freedom, will end up taking freedom from you later. It's like you're robbing from future freedom in order to have now freedom, right? If you're not thinking about consequences, or if you're not thinking about implications, or you won't commit to anything. And so you can't ever establish like a long-term healthy relationship or maybe career capital. that's going to take away opportunities in the future. So too much freedom actually ends up creating no freedom.
Yeah.
And too much invulnerability will do the same thing. It'll create no invulnerability, meaning or being very vulnerable. And the best way to see this is it's a fantasy to believe we are ever truly going to be invulnerable to all things that could potentially just disrupt our lives or be something that's a threat. But what we can do is we can gain resilience over time against it. We can get out of our comfort zone enough to be able to perceive what's a real threat and what's an imagined threat, or to basically become somebody who doesn't need a feeling of invulnerability. They just are somebody who is increasingly less vulnerable to the things that are coming at it. And so, or at the person. So we have to, even if we really fear for our safety, even if we are the kind of person who's really anxious, the key is not to hide ourselves away. The key is to be willing to have the courage to step out and to expand one's comfort zone and to be willing to sit with that uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so the best way to not be vulnerable is to not put walls up. It's to learn how to engage in a world if you don't have walls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just like with freedom, too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. With your sugar analogy is the perfect example.
Yeah.
There are good things that come from this, though. So it's not just all bad news. It's not all just, here are the ways that you're going to mess up in a relationship or mess up in life. Some of the good things that come from an invulnerability fixation or somebody who's pre-wired to think in these terms is that these people tend to be prepared. So preparedness is an advantage. So is awareness of one's limitations and a sense of, making sure they themselves are safe and others are safe as well. Like there's like a real awareness and understanding of the importance of that. There's also a sense of consistency that oftentimes comes along with this. The appropriate amount of cautiousness, right? Like an advisable cautiousness comes along with it. And also IJ types tend to be very reliable. Yeah. So there's a reliability that comes along with it.
Often insightful too. I think when you sit with a memory for a long time and you really understand what happened and you get the wisdom from that, or you look at a perspective of the future, or you run a simulation with your intuition and you get a sense of the deep insight, I think this can be these four types can be very insightful if they sit with that and they have the processing time, for some of that benefit like you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, ruminating on lessons is the path to wisdom, right?
Yeah.
How did I mess up? What are the lessons I should have scooped up? And then also, what is the deeper insight? What are the hidden forces at work? These things are usually things that bring wisdom.
So today what we want to talk about is 5 counterintuitive ways that this will show up for IJs. In other words, ways maybe you think you're getting away with something. We'll talk about that in a moment, though. Before we go into the counterintuitive ways, let's just talk about how we tend to see it showing up. We'll review that again. We talked about it in that first episode. We covered it already, but let's just reattune to this. How do we see this showing up for IJs mostly?
Yeah, so the usual way of fixation, the invulnerability fixation shows up in a relationship is just by being emotionally or psychologically unavailable. Like in the same way that a freedom fixation is the person not wanting to be trapped by something that feels like a commitment.
Yeah.
An IJ type might put up walls and put a lot of defenses up to make sure that the person they're in a relationship with can't really do a lot of damage. And so it's it's also avoidant in the same way that the EPs can be avoidant. This is also an avoidance, but it's not an avoidance of having to be stuck someplace. It's an avoidance of having to be, potentially harmed or damaged in the relationship. It's a protection. And so the standard way it looks like is, wanting to process everything alone, like never sharing feelings or never sharing what's really going on with you. The idea that, this, you don't want to get too close. You don't want to let your guard down. You always have a vigilance, like this person could leave at any time and hurt you, or they could do something that's damaging. And so it's a withdraw. A lot of times it looks like a withdraw of energy from the relationship.
Probably the more chaotic your partner is, or you perceive them to be, the more closed out you might be. You might have stronger protections up. I think it's an avoidance of chaos often too.
Yep, for sure.
So we're going to talk about some of the counterintuitive ways, the 5 ways that this shows up. More sophisticated, more nuanced, more counterintuitively. You're getting what you need. You're still protecting that vulnerability, but you're doing it where maybe people can't call you on it because you know you're doing it, but maybe other people don't.
Yeah, it's a smuggle even maybe from yourself. So if you are an individual that might be older or more seasoned in your life, and you've done quite a bit of work around this, you know you're a person who tends to, like run to safety and avoid things that could feel like they could be perceived as a threat.
Yeah.
You might have done some real work around that, and you're willing to get out of your comfort zone. But just like when we talked about the freedom fixation smuggles its way through, there are invulnerability, or the invulnerability fixation can also smuggle its way through.
Channeling my inner Brene Brown right now.
Yeah.
Talking to you, IJs. If you're brave enough, I'd love for you when we talk about these 5 counterintuitive ways, see if you can own up to it in the comments below this episode. See if you can say, yeah, okay, number 2, I see myself, and explain, give us a story of why maybe that's showing up for you. Maybe this is a good exercise for you as you listen to be a little more vulnerable, share a little bit more of yourself on one of these that you identify in this episode, or something that you identify. Let's see how that goes. All right, number 1. Counterintuitive way that invulnerability shows up for IJ personality types. Becoming the, quote, safe haven for others while never really sharing yourself. Mm-hmm. How's that for one that's counterintuitive? I'm sure an IJ is listening right now going, yeah, hitting a little close to home, Joel.
Yeah, well, and the way this shows up is usually the IJ individual is like this great listener, and they're a rock in the relationship, and they're always willing to be a shoulder to cry on. But when the conversation turns to what's going on for them, they redirect it back to the other person. So they don't feel like they're emotionally unavailable because they're so supportive, but they're not really sharing of themselves. They're not really going to a more, sort of a deeper, more vulnerable place in there's not the reciprocity there.
Yeah. So that the shoulder you can cry on or lean on, maybe you're that person as an IJ, you're the one that's the rock for your partner, and here it's a protection mechanism.
Yeah. You're not opening yourself up to, or you're not willing to let other people in on your inner struggles.
Yeah.
Like you're just going to keep that in-house, and then nobody can weaponize it against you, but also you're going to end up with a lot of one-sided relationships. I mean, I feel like this one's a pretty common one for IJ types. I hear them talk about it a lot. It's like, I'm always there for everyone else, but nobody's there for me. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it's like by design, unconsciously by design from the IJ. They don't realize they're creating it in order to keep themselves protected.
Yeah. All right, number 2, counterintuitive way that IJs might have a fixation on vulnerability. Deep, committed relationships, but with an unshakable inner distance. Mm-hmm. So deep commitment, but there's this unshakable inner distance with your partner that is there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a commitment to the relationship, but this always holding something back, right? This idea that I guess maybe the way an individual could describe a partnership like this is like, we've been together for years, but I don't always know if I totally know them, right? Or I don't know if I fully know them, even though we've been together for a long time. Like there's just this thing that feels impenetrable internally that you just can't. And that's not to say that, I mean, everybody needs to have something of themselves that is not, fair game for everybody else. We all need a part of ourselves that we have a relationship to self around. So there's nothing wrong with having parts of ourselves that are just for us, right? Like, I mean, we got to be in relationship to ourselves too. But there's a sense that it's not just that there's a part of themselves that they're reserving for the self. It's more like nobody actually ever truly gets to know me, right? Like the real me or the deeper me. That's and not because that's set aside for oneself, but because of a fear. Again, just like we talked about in the last episode, some of these behaviors might not be necessarily bad on the surface. That first one of wanting to show up for other people and not wanting to burden others with your challenges or problems. It's you do need to get to a place where you're willing to allow yourself to be helped, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with having a preference for being a supportive individual. Like if you just prefer that, then that's okay. You can be the support. It's when that is actually a smuggle for not wanting to be invulnerable. That's when it becomes a problem. And the same thing with having a part set aside for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is if that's you smuggling a desire to be invulnerable, right? So it's really the why behind it that's the bigger issue.
Yeah, it's kind of like it makes me think of like the tool versus the use of the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Like a hammer is neutral, but you can use it to harm or to build. And I think some of these things they're neutral in and of themselves. It's how are you using this? How is it showing up in your life? And again, everybody's going to be, that's why we talk about it in a principled way, is because it's not going to be all INFJs need to do this.
Right.
You might need to if you're an INFJ that struggles with this, or maybe this isn't something you struggle with. You're the only one that can really determine that in your relationship because you are so intimate with it. So it's not, that you're an INFJ you have to do that. It's how are you an INFJ and how will you think about this in your life as an example?
Right. And when we're talking about firm fixations, like an ISTJ is going to do it too, even those are very different types.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about number 3. Highly curated displays of vulnerability is another way that this can counterintuitively show up for an IJ type. So I'm vulnerable. I just do it when we're at a personal growth retreat over those 3 days with a box of tissues, and I can cry my eyes out and be very vulnerable with my group of people that I've curated carefully, and then no other context besides that. So, I mean, I think that can be good to have place, or my therapist. I'm vulnerable with my therapist, but that's it. That's the only place I'm vulnerable.
Yeah.
And we're talking about inside of a relationship. So maybe there's a category or one part of your relationship you feel like you're curating that vulnerability with another person.
Yeah.
Are you actually being vulnerable is the question.
Well, I think it goes one step further. I don't think it's even just I'm only going to be vulnerable with my therapist or at a personal growth retreat. I think it's I'm only going to tell stories that will appear vulnerable to others once I've fully processed them.
Nice.
Right? Like as in I'm
actually not really vulnerable here.
Not at all.
But it seems like I'm vulnerable.
That's
I'm
right.
not on the other side of this.
Like it might be a tearjerker of a story.
Ooh.
It might be something that feels very heartbreaking and raw, but it's actually more like a documentary. It's already been filmed. It's already been edited. It's got the title card at the end.
I've done my grieving around it.
Right. Like I'll share the stories. I'll only share the stories that I feel like I'm complete with. And so is it really raw? Well, not really, but it's an affectation of being raw. So there's something to be said for selective vulnerability. You don't want to just be vulnerable with everybody all the time. Not that an IJ is going to have a problem with that, but it's like even if you course correct, even if you get more vulnerable, you're probably not going to be one of those people, right? That's just like telling your sob story to everybody all the time. But there is still we learn the social rules. Like we learn that it's not okay to necessarily always be the person who's just listening to everybody else and never volunteering. If you're the individual that never shares, then it's like people start to go, well, why aren't you sharing?
Yeah.
So you learn the game, the social game, and that means I have to share. And so I'll go ahead and share, but what am I really sharing? Am I sharing something that is really, like this is real for me? This is something I'm truly dealing with and something I'm going through. Or is it only the affectation of that, and you'll only share the stuff that you feel complete with? And so I think that's why it's a smuggle. Like it's a really easy one to even trick the self around. And of course an IJ is like, well, why would I want to share something I haven't fully processed yet? That sounds terrible. And that's the point. The point is that particularly in a relationship or a partnership, that's a part of it. Like this is your backpacking buddy through life. This is the person that's supposed to help you get through difficult things, trials, challenges. Like that's kind of the point of a relationship, is that you're helping each other out. If you look at it through the lens of the Enneagram, how the Enneagram has those 3 instincts, which are all survival strategies. One of them is self-preservation, which is a direct connection to our health and our, to making sure we're safe. There's social, which is the idea that there's safety in numbers. So you make sure that you have like a thriving community and people who have your back. But then there's sexual, one-to-one. And the sexual subtype strategy is reliance on another person who is your deepest intimate. that we're traveling through life together, that you and I have each other's back. But I don't know how to have your back if you're not vulnerable with me, right? If I don't get to see the things that are true challenges for you, if I don't really understand your story, if I don't know what is really having an impact on you, then how am I supposed to have your back, right? That's a piece. That's why vulnerability is so important in a relationship. And so, the idea of selective vulnerability, even with your deepest relationship, that might be a place where you don't have to be so selective, and being willing to share something only after you've processed it can very much feel like sharing, right? I did it. I did the thing I was supposed to do. But did you really communicate to this person who's supposed to have your back? Did you really communicate to them something that has some real rawness and depth to it?
Yeah. Number 4, counterintuitive way this might show up. This might hit home, IJ listening right now or watching. Being overly private in the name of, quote, respecting boundaries. Mm-hmm. Who's going to call you on that?
Right.
What a noble thing to do, respecting everybody's boundaries, including your own. There's always nobleness in this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how could you ever say that's a bad thing?
Yeah.
So let's talk about this. Why is this counterintuitive?
Well, I think it's basically virtualizing emotional distance. Right. And there, I mean, yeah, you're supposed to respect boundaries. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So why is that a bad reason?
Well, again, it only is a challenge if it's smuggling the fixation. And so this idea of turning emotional distance into a virtue, which is like, well, I respect people's privacy and space, so I expect the same. So don't ever get me out of my comfort zone, right? Don't ever push anything. And it's like another way to not have to share. You know, it's another way to not have to be real with your partner, which is, I don't want to burden them. You know, like I don't want to burden anyone, so I'm just going to keep it to myself. And that's understandable if it's people just in your life, right? If it's just like, you know, the person you're sitting next to at the bus stop, totally understand. But this is your relationship. This is your person. You know, this is like your life partner. And so this isn't just anybody. And really, I think we did a podcast on it a long time ago, but there's this biblical principle. I can't even remember where it is anymore. My biblical knowledge is starting to leave me. But I remember it was a scripture that was a letter of the Apostle Paul, where he told people to carry the burdens of each other, but each one should carry their own load. And so I was trying to figure out, well, what's the difference between a burden and a load? And the burden was extra stuff, like anything that's too heavy to carry. Whereas each one should carry their own load was this idea of like, what are your responsibilities as a person? So basically, like everybody should be taking care of their own responsibilities.
We're all on a backpacking trip. Carry your own pack.
Carry your own pack.
But don't make everybody else carry your pack for you, or don't carry other people's packs. It's just everybody carries their own pack. We'll all be good. Right. Unless they have a trouble, like they're disabled, they have a problem, then pick up their pack and help them.
Or if they've got extra for some reason, like maybe somebody in their family got really sick and now they have to carry 2 backpacks, right? And that would be a burden. Yeah. So we help each other out with each other's burdens, the extra things, the things that are on top of our responsibilities, but we should still be carrying our own responsibilities. Well, when it comes to a relationship, a romantic relationship, each other's challenges are not burdens, right? Like it's my responsibility to help you out when you've got extra going on. And it's your responsibility to help me out when I've got extra going on. And that's just what we signed up for. That's what relationship is. That's what commitment is. You know, traditionally, in traditional vows for marriage or wedding vows, it's like through sickness and health, for better or for worse, it's like we're going to be there for each other. We're going to be buddies, right? Yeah. But if a person is unwilling to, quote unquote, burden their partner with what's really going on for them because they're, quote unquote, respecting privacy or boundaries, well, they're actually robbing the other individual of the ability to really show up with what they committed to. This is my responsibility, is to help you out when you're having challenges. So to deny our partners of that means that we're denying them the commitment that they made to us, should we say be in a marital situation. So it's from my perspective, it's like having a misunderstanding of the difference between a responsibility and a burden.
Yeah.
And to consider that my emotions or my challenges or what I'm going through is a burden to you means that I'm actually not understanding that you, like, I'm kind of diminishing the commitment. I'm diminishing what the other person signed up for, the responsibility of being there for your partner. And so it's easy to virtuize, but in a counterintuitive way, it's not a virtue. It's something that will undermine the commitments that have been made.
I think it's a really interesting way to see it. It actually goes to number 5 here, which, I mean, in a similar way, providing solutions for your partner instead of being emotionally present. So if somebody comes, it's that kind of classic, like, I don't want you to solve my problems, I just want you to listen to me. It's like solving the problem when the partner comes, because that avoids the intimacy, that avoids the vulnerabilities. It's like, no, we'll just fix the problem. We're not going to talk about your emotions around it. That makes me feel vulnerable potentially as an IJ type. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is something that counterintuitively comes up all the time. And it very similar to what you were talking about here. It's not allowing the other person to express emotionally around you. They're always a problem to solve when they come into your framework. Like when they come to you with something that maybe is heavily emotional, it's like, I don't have space for your emotions, but we can solve the problem together. That's fine. I think the person would feel very left in the cold around that, like most people do.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably certain IJs probably struggle with this more than others. Maybe the ITJs would struggle more with that one than the IFJs. I think IFJs tend to be able to sit in the emotional stew of someone. Usually, sometimes they don't, but usually they can.
Yeah, sometimes they're cold and problem solvers.
Sometimes they're cold problem solvers. I know some of those IFJs.
Yeah.
But I think ITJs definitely, this is something at least is projected onto them. You just want to solve my problems and not just hear my emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes some more seasoned ITJ to usually get to a place where they understand the value of emotional validation and being there with the person. But I think this is what happens after one has already justified not emotionally, quote unquote, burdening their partner with their own issues.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it keeps us separate. It keeps us distant from each other. You've got your emotional challenges and I've got over there, and I've got my emotional challenges over here. So if I've convinced myself that sharing my challenges and my stuff is a burden to you, well, then of course I'm going to code it the same way, going the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And if I think that I'm not, like it's not safe to let you know, to let you in on what's going on for me, I'm going to code it the opposite direction. I'm not going to think it's safe for me to know what's really going on for you. And so now there's just this, there's this space and this wall. There's not the connection. There's not the rapport going back and forth. There's a you over there and me over here. And I think it's understandable to hesitate and to feel like there's potential dragons in a relationship. There always are. And it's the most natural thing in the world to be terrified of how much damage your partner can do to you emotionally and psychologically. Yes. That's completely understandable. And yet, that makes us even more vulnerable because it erodes the connection. It erodes the intimacy in a relationship. And so now the relationship is far more likely to break down. It's far more vulnerable. The relationship itself, the entity of the relationship, is more vulnerable if we stay out of connection, if we're not deeply intimate. So in the same way that the freedom challenge creates its own little Ouroboros of the snake eating its tail, too much freedom ends up with no freedom. It's the same thing. Too much invulnerability leaves one highly vulnerable. Yeah. And so we've got to watch for these impulses. An IJ type needs to watch for these invulnerability fixations kind of smuggling their way in, masquerading as virtues of respecting boundaries, or masquerading as like not wanting to be a burden, or masquerading as like, I don't want to do that to a person. And it's like, well, what you're really doing is you're doing something to yourself and to the relationship. You're making it so that it's not, that you're not truly available to each other.
I think there's a cost to everything. So as you're talking about that, I almost imagine like, if you're an IJ who your life is invulnerable, nobody's getting through, there's a vulnerability cost somewhere. And I think to your point, it may not be in the same channel that the expenditure is. This is what just came up for me as you were talking, Antonia. You actually might be invulnerable to your outside world in a lot of ways. You might be protected, but you said that it might put pressure on your relationship itself to be vulnerable. So the vulnerability may not lie with you personally, although I think it does. But you may be able to spot it outside of yourself first, the cost of it outside of yourself. Maybe your partner's more vulnerable because you're so impenetrable. Maybe your relationship's more vulnerable. Maybe your children are more vulnerable. Like, vulnerability is actually more exposed somewhere in your life, I would guess, because you're so buttoned up and tight around yourself. There's a cost somewhere. There always is, right? Everything is trying to find equilibrium. And so if we have too much of something clustered over here, there's a void of it on another space somewhere else. So I just want to seed that to you as an idea to be spotting and thinking about in your life. The other thing this makes me think of too, I think, and this, for some reason, I feel like IJ this is the message to say here. I think relationships right now are in a mass way in the middle of Stephen Covey's dependency model. So Stephen Covey has this model where he talks about how anything that we do, we start off as we're learning it, we're very dependent on that energy or that system or that person or whatever it is. We're very dependent. It's the honeymoon phase of something, right? We're kind of like over-identifying with it, overly eager for it, whatever, like a lot of that carbonation. And so a relationship has this at the very beginning often. And then we go through a period of time going, okay, I need to make sure I'm separate from the other person. I need to make sure I've got good boundaries. We're both separate individuals. And so or anything, a relationship to anything, not just relationships. We go through an independent phase where we kind of break away from it. Teenagers go through this with their parents. They are very dependent on mom and dad. 13, 14 hits, puberty hits. They're like, screw you, mom and dad. I'm never going to listen to you ever again. And they rebel on purpose. It's a natural thing that we're supposed to do. And eventually, after we have our independent time, we now are our whole self. We know what it's like to be dependent. We know what it's like to be independent. And we go, okay, now I get to choose when I'm connected to somebody. So no longer am I dependent and no longer am I independent. I'm interdependent with another person. It's a mature place to be. Unfortunately, I think in mass, like in culture right now, relationships are usually viewed through the frame of independency. It's almost wrong and bad to think of yourself as like identified in like a coupledom in a way. I see this, not everybody, but there's like this kind of growing sentiment that no, you should be 100% on your own. You federate with a partner. They're a position, and maybe you can swap them out for somebody else later, but you are your own independent person, and you have the partner that you're with right now in the term that you're with them, the season you're with them. And so I think a lot of people, as we talk about this, that's the overarching framework in the conversation, because it's an avoidance of that dependency. And when we talk about being vulnerable, I can just hear somebody right now that's in the independent phase of their life, and especially in relationships, going, you want me to go be dependent, Joel and Antonia? Is that what you're trying to say? And that's not all what we're trying to say. Mm-mm. We're not saying go be dependent on another person and have to just give all your energy away and be completely vulnerable to somebody that might abuse you or hurt you or step on your emotions or your energies. That's not at all what we're trying to communicate. And maybe you've had a past relationship where that has been the case. We're saying seek out interdependent relationships. You are truly your independent person. You know yourself. You have your sense of sovereignty is who you are. The other person has their sense of self. And you choose to merge yourself. You choose to be interdependent with each other in a very mature relationship. That's the ultimate goal here and why we're talking about these things.
Yeah, I suspect people who are terrified of being vulnerable in a relationship usually don't have a strong sense of independence of self.
Yeah.
Right? They don't feel like they can just handle it on their own, whatever it is. Yeah. Right? Like whatever life throws at them, they don't feel that sense of confidence and that sense of centeredness that they're going to be okay. They see threats everywhere. And that's how invulnerability creates more, like the invulnerability fixation creates more vulnerability. Yeah. I think of somebody who's at this point maybe like a shut-in, and the contemporary world makes it incredibly easy to be a shut-in. Like everything is delivered very easily. Like you do not have to step outside of your house ever at all, and you will get the majority of the world's conveniences right now. You have all your entertainment piped in through devices and through electricity. Like there's really no reason to leave your house.
Food delivered.
Mm-hmm. But if there's any disruption to that system, like if for some reason we just no longer have the capacity to have all of our our supply lines or whatever all set up the way it is, that person is going to be the most vulnerable to the disruption in the world. They're going to be the person who's has it the worst at that point. Yeah. Because they just can't even do basic stuff like, leave their home and go grocery shopping or whatever. Now, I'm not necessarily picking on people who have agoraphobia, because I know that's a real thing and it's kind of horrifying, and it would take a lot of therapy in order to get to the other side of. But the smartest thing you can do is get that therapy and get to the other side of it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the best way to make sure that you're not vulnerable to everything that you're fearing, is to, the way out is through. And so it's the same thing in relationships. It's the same thing in this idea that you're talking about. In order to have an interdependent relationship, it means that you have to be fully independent first. You have to know who you are and have a sense of self. And you aren't totally reliant on somebody else. But then a beautiful relationship comes along and you grow in intimacy. And now, why would you want to be without that person, right? That's your buddy. And so this invulnerability fixation, what it does is it keeps people from being able to take that like final, that final step of making it so that if that person wasn't there anymore, that would really be a truly painful experience. Like you're risking pain, right? You're risking, you're risking having this person really be important and centered in your life.
Because the reward for being vulnerable is intimacy, a true, deep intimacy where you share parts of yourself with this person that you wouldn't share with anyone else. You wouldn't be vulnerable to just anybody on the street because you're so interdependent with them and you've curated a relationship that's trusting and deep and secure that you can open up your heart and share things that are a little bit more insecure for you. Maybe things you would just feel, oh my God, I can't share that. But this person loves you and you're in connection with them and you truly are somebody that wants that intimacy. I think that's what's in front of you. If you're an IJ that struggles with this vulnerability stuff, what's on the other side of the struggle and the training and the ability to overcome it is that intimacy I think that everybody craves. So how do we do this, by the way? I mean, personality type is pointing us to the problem here, the challenge. We're trying to protect that dominant cognitive function that IJs have. And this is what Carl Jung talked about being one-sided, right? We know this from, persona, ego, shadow work. We can very much become one-sided if we just continue to protect what makes sense to us and we don't round ourselves out. And the map of our personality is the solution. So remember I mentioned at the beginning, go to that car model that we use here at Personality Hacker. I think that car model gives us a map for actual type development. If you're an IJ, you're going to have an introverted perceiving process, either perspectives or memory as your driver. But it means your co-pilot is either going to be effectiveness, extroverted thinking, or harmony, extroverted feeling. And this part of you is pretty good at setting boundaries. It's good at knowing where you stop and somebody else starts. And it's a muscle you can exercise and learn to use more to know how you feel about things, how you're engaging with the world. And then it acts as a translator to the backseat of your car, that 10-year-old and 3-year-old who are a little more uncertain for you. So it's a whole system running of personality that I think can get us out of the wilderness here with this invulnerability fixation. And so if you're an IJ listening, I recommend going over to personalityhacker.com, and we have 16 personality owner's manuals for all the 16 types. And the one for your type will go into the firm model. We talk about that, and we talk about how to get out of it, how to overcome it, what it looks like, and how to grow all the parts of yourself in that car model for a good life. And so I really recommend going over and getting a copy, your owner's manual for your type, because I think it's going to unpack that for you.
Yeah. So just like we talked about with the freedom fixation. Yeah. The person's driver or dominant is going to be extroverted.
That's right.
And that means their co-pilot or auxiliary will automatically be introverted, and so will their 3-year-old or inferior function. So for the freedom people, it's about slowing down.
This is the last episode.
When we talked about that.
EP types.
So for IJ types, it's going to be the opposite. That auxiliary co-pilot, like you talked about, is going to be extroverted. You mentioned extroverted feeling or extroverted thinking. And so is the 3-year-old or inferior. It's going to be either extroverted sensation for the INJs or extroverted intuition or exploration for the ISJs. And integrating that 3-year-old or inferior function is where IJ types can have more courage.
Yeah.
Right. In the face of a fear of the world throwing something at you that you're not ready for, or something that's disruptive, or something that's going to you just didn't plan for or prepare for. That's what that function is designed to do. Right. When it's a driver or dominant, it's designed to do that so much it creates a freedom fixation. But as a 3-year-old or inferior, you're not going to get fixated on freedom necessarily, but you can tap into it in order to gain the courage of somebody who wants to explore just for its own sake. Meaning that, okay, well, there might be a bit of a threat here, but here I go, right? So integrating that part of you creates some courage. And then the co-pilot or auxiliary function, which is more of a, it's a little bit more ordered. It can help with that courage, but also do it in a way that's not chaotic. It can help sort of understand roles or understand expectations, have dialogue and conversation, connect. Extroverted feeling or harmony is all about rapport and connecting with another person. And it can also help go a little deeper in that connection. Or extroverted thinking effectiveness can help have expectations of like roles, but it can also communicate real thoughts, right? It can really communicate what's on one's mind and help with candor. So it's the real secret here for IJ types is to lean into the more extroverted parts, the parts that are willing to have courage when connecting and communicating and when acting, right?
Yeah. Taking
action. It's not about slowing down for like if it is for the EPs. For the IJs, it's about speeding up. It's about going and doing it, even though you're kind of scared. It's a little scary. And that includes on an emotional level, being willing to take some risks.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're an IJ listening or watching right now, or maybe you have an IJ you're in relationship with an IJ, we want to hear from you. While you're over at personalityhacker.com, getting your owner's manual for your personality type and checking out all the stuff we've got there, like the car model and all of our resources, go into this episode, and directly below this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Share, a comment, a question. Love to hear a story about your life and your situation. Maybe you could unpack some of this, how this has shown up for you in a real way. Have you overcome vulnerability in your life? Is it something you still struggle with? Do you have techniques or tools to be able to be more vulnerable with your partner? Has it been a challenge? Have you just never been able to unlock that and you've struggled with it? We want to hear whatever's coming up for you. I think it's important we get a dialogue around this and we can talk about it as a community and get people talking about this. I think there's a lot of ways that you can overcome it and see that intimacy that I think we all crave. So again, come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and various Android platforms. You can listen to us on Spotify, lots of different places to do so. And if you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, that helps us out a lot, and it's really awesome. I didn't mention last time, I should probably mention this time, that we also have a video podcast, which you might be watching right now on YouTube. You can go over, like, subscribe, hit the bell for future episodes, and also leave a comment underneath the video of this podcast.
Yeah, all right. So we're going to continue this series. Next week, we're going to talk about the R in firm, which is the rightness fixation for the IP types, and then the episode after that will be the M for management. We'll get to the EJs at the last one, but we're going to get to IJ or IPs next episode. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.